What excites us the most going into the 2025 season? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And you can also find us on wherever you get your podcasts, pretty much all those platforms, and we're on YouTube as well. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do lots of stuff over there. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Now, today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Now, a reminder before we dive into tonight's show is that beginning next Monday, we're going to be back to 5 episodes a week, and it's really perfect timing because we'll be heading off to Surprise, Arizona next Saturday. We'll have tons of coverage out there. Might even bring you a Sunday episode now that I think about it, because we should have some form of access, a couple interviews there, hopefully lined up, but then Monday and Tuesday for sure. We'll be having some video. We'll be having some interview. We'll be having some episodes there as well. So lots and lots of stuff to do out there in Surprise, Arizona. Very excited for that. But if you've been wondering why we haven't had as many episodes over the last few weeks, because we've been in a little bit of an off season of our own right before the season kicks back off. But next week, that's when things are back to normal, Monday through Friday, unless I were to be out of town and not available to do one, or I would be sick. So with it being a very exciting week for us on deck, I wanted to talk a little bit about, in a preview sort of way, what's exciting us the most about this bunch. And it can be very general. I would love to know everybody's thoughts on YouTube, whether it be about a player, it be about the schedule, a game you may be going to, or just the matter that there's expectations now. It's not like last year where a lot was going to have to go right for that team to be successful, and a lot did go right. This year, there is a certain level of expectation that the Royals are going to be good, and they're going to have to live up to that type of hype. You know, last offseason, the hype began with all the moves they made in the offseason, but even then, it's a dice roll, because we've seen teams spend money before and it not really work in their favor, and they're out of it by the All-Star break. That wasn't the case for the Royals last year. And I know this offseason has been a little bit slower. It hasn't been as exhilarating because they haven't basically overhauled an entire rotation, added tons of pieces of the bullpen, added a few bats here and there. They didn't have many boxes to check off. And there still is time to add that middle of the order bat. 3 more outfielders are now off the market. Randal Grichuk went yesterday, Ramon Laureano, and then today it was Harrison Bader going to Minnesota. We'll talk about the Grichuk thing in the second segment, because the Royals were interested, per Andy Rogers, and tried to make a play for him, but it just appeared in the end that he wanted to go back to Arizona on a very team-friendly deal, 1 year, $5 million. So still a couple options left out there. I might throw in a couple names, but who knows? Maybe they're going big for a trade to pull off before camp begins, and then that lineup, that rotation, that bullpen would pretty much be set. But for me, when I look at what excites me the most about this group, is that I think maybe the most underrated part of that team in September has a chance to be one of its strongest contributors in April and May and June, and allow the Royals the opportunity to get off on the right foot. I think going into last year, because we had an episode on it, I had called the bullpen one of the strengths of the team going in, because they'd found a lot of strike throwers. They had guys that had pitched in the postseason. There was some upside there with James MacArthur. Going into camp, you were kind of high on John McMillan, but that bullpen did not get off to a good start in the month of April. And a lot of those veteran pickups didn't amount to much in 2024. But going into 2025, I think there's a little bit more legitimacy to that group being a strength. And I got asked this a few times after the Royals brought in Carlos Estevez, was that, where's the ceiling for this bullpen? Are they going to be top 5, top 10? Are they going to be around where they were last year? And I think the ceiling has to be top 10 in baseball, maybe top 5 in the American League. My issue would be that I don't know if they get enough swing and miss to be a Cleveland-like bullpen or a Yankees-like bullpen that we saw in the postseason. I think they are probably slated in that 5 to 10 range in all of baseball if things fall their way, because they've got a lot of hard throwers now and guys that do have tremendous upside to take that bullpen to the next level. You have Lucas Erceg at the back end. You have Carlos Estevez. You have Hunter Harvey, who now has maybe a better chance to bounce back because he's not being thrust into the setup role right from the get-go. But going back to 2022 and 2023, and even the first part of 2024, Hunter Harvey was good. He was a reliable reliever for Baltimore and Washington. Don't think he was ever healthy in Kansas City. So you add him to the bullpen. Angel Serpa is running it up to 98, 99 with that sinker. Carlos Hernandez touches triple digits. They have 5 guys that are projected to be on the opening day roster that are above the 80th percentile in fastball velocity. And I know that stat doesn't always mean everything, but the reason I bring it up is that J.J. McCullough made it very much a point when the bullpen was struggling that they needed more swing and miss guys. They needed more hard throwers in the bullpen, and they went out there and got Harvey. They went out there and got Erceg. That helped them a little bit, because what last year's bunch had was a bunch of soft throwers. Really, the guy that threw the hardest was Serpa, and he didn't start hitting 98, 99 until about May or June. Like in April, he was not throwing 98, 99. He was still around 94 to 95. There was nobody in that bullpen that could throw hard because Hernandez was still in AAA because he was banged up in spring training. Now they've got a lot of guys that can answer the call and have the power stuff to get you out of a lot of situations where early on last year, that group didn't really have that put away stuff. They banked on those guys pitching to contact, hitting their spots, and the defense playing well. And that worked for them in stretches. But the reason I'm so excited about the bullpen is I think the 2 headliners, the 2 frontline guys, can really take this team to another level. Because if you've got that 2-run lead in the 7th inning, and maybe Hunter Harvey does bounce back, so now you've got 3 really good arms in the back end of the bullpen, you're going to win a lot of baseball games. And that's going to allow you to get that lineup figured out. If that lineup goes through a stretch where they're only giving you 2 or 3 runs a night, well, count on that rotation to carry the torch, but then the bullpen to take the torch and keep going. And now they've got those guys in the bullpen that can get those big outs, that can get the swing and miss. And we saw at the highest level in the postseason. If they can take that momentum, I feel really excited about what that group can do. And then probably the next thing I'm very excited about is the top of the lineup. I'm still holding out hope they get one more bat. I've said that numerous times over the last few episodes. But Jonathan India at the leadoff spot, I think, is going to have a great opportunity to make people like him right away, because Royals fans are starved for a premier leadoff hitter. I don't think Jonathan India is a premier leadoff hitter where he's the most feared guy, or, it's not like it's a Aaron Judge leading off like we've seen him do a couple of times at a Yankees uniform. It's not like you're facing Juan Soto up there. But Jonathan India can work the count in ways that a lot of Royals guys couldn't last year. This is somebody that had a walk rate that was over 12%, and he's going to get pitches to hit now because Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be right behind him, and Vinny Pasquantino is going to be behind him, and Salvador Perez behind him. So Jonathan India, I think, has that chance early on to really showcase his value, because that walk rate, that approach, that's not going to change. But the more hittable pitches he'll get, the better chance he has to become one of the more feared hitters in the lineup, where it's the 8th inning. You've got 2nd and 3rd, 1 out, down by 1. I want Jonathan India up at the plate. Whereas last year, if you ran back up to the top of the order, sometimes you were throwing to a guy that had an on-base less than 300, less than 290 at some points. And for Jonathan India, even if the bat is a little bit slow to get going, he's going to be able to get on base a lot because of that walk rate. So to have a new guy at the top of the order, that's something I'm pretty excited about. And I can't wait to see what he looks like in spring training. We'll get our first look next weekend. But to see where he plays as well, will he be at second base and Massey goes to left field? Will he go to left field or will he go to third base? Is he going to DH more than he plays second? That's another thing that adds to the excitement of just the unknown. The Royals, I think, want to wait till everybody gets to camp and then work those guys out in a variety of positions to see where the best fit would be. But to have a new leadoff hitter, that's something that's always going to be exciting. Really, I think for most fans, when you have a new player, that's what excites you the most. And then the third option here to close out this segment, I'm pumped now to see Kris Bubic in the rotation. I hope he wins that job in camp. I've gotten a few questions about Kyle Wright. From kind of the rumblings out there, it doesn't appear he's going to be 100% ready by the time we get to spring training. Could always change on a dime, but I think they're going to slow play it more than maybe some fans want to. And then you have somebody like Kris Bubic, who was so good in relief last year, but I think has the upside to be a damn good number 4 in that rotation. And if he can take that spot and run with it, you've got Cole Reagan, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, Kris Bubic, and then likely Michael Lorenzen in that bullpen, or that rotation, excuse me. I think that can be one of the best rotations in all of baseball again, assuming they can carry that trend they had last year where you're throwing a lot of innings, you're logging a lot of quality starts. And I think Kris Bubic can be one of those strikeout guys in the rotation. He's got the stuff, he's got the spin rate, and I think he's got the command to be able to do it. So those three things, that bullpen, what they're going to look like early on, Jonathan India at the top of the order, then Kris Bubic in the rotation are the three things I'm really excited to see come spring training here in just about a week. A little over a week, I believe it is, because I think today is 1 week until pitchers and catchers report, and then a few days later will be the full squad workout that we will be down for in Surprise, Arizona. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we got to talk a little bit about another outfield bat coming off the board. Randal Grichuk, well, the Royals were interested in Randal Grichuk, but in the end, he decides to go back to Arizona on a very cheap deal. What do we make of it? We'll dive into it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today in PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you are cashing out. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Well, as the news broke yesterday, I think a lot of Royals fans were maybe a little bit flustered that another outfield bat came off the market, Randal Grichuk being one of them, Ramon Laureano, another one going to Baltimore. In fact, about 5 minutes ago, as I was recording this podcast, Ben Gamel goes to Houston on a $1 million deal. The AL Central made a move, and the Minnesota Twins bringing in Harrison Bader, an elite defensive center fielder. We've talked about him on the podcast before. I didn't think it was a perfect fit, but if they wanted to platoon with Kyle Isbell in center field, you'd be getting, for the most part, the same production from both of those guys. But Minnesota is the one that goes in there, gets Bader on a $6 million deal over 1 year. I think there's an option in there as well. But Grichuk was the one that, per Annie Rogers, does a great job covering this team and likely will be down there earlier than everybody in Surprise, Arizona, along with Jalen Thompson. The Royals were interested in bringing in Randal Grichuk as maybe one of those bats to help the outfield. I don't know if they viewed him as a starter. I don't know if they viewed him as a platoon bat. But last year for Arizona, Randal Grichuk was a very good platoon bat for them. And they also platooned Jock Peterson. So you had 2 guys there that really thrived in the role that Arizona gave them. And the Diamondbacks did have a very threatening lineup. They were coming off a World Series appearance. Didn't really live up to all the hype and building on that World Series appearance, but still that lineup had some scary hitters in it. And I don't think that Randal Grichuk would have transformed the Royals lineup. I think it would have been a little bit of an upgrade over what they had, considering some of the comments I've gotten on Randal Grichuk. Clearly not everybody is a huge fan of him, and I wasn't trying to come across that I think he was the answer, but at some point, I do think you have to be a little bit realistic as to what you're looking for. And one of those topics is, do the Royals go the trade route? Do they go the free agent route? And for those that are begging for the trade to happen, I'm not going to say it's impossible, because I think this offseason has been a perfect example as expect the unexpected. I don't think there's going to be a scenario in which you got that smoke and then there's a fire and a deal happens. The Carlos Estevez deal came out of nowhere, and I don't know how long it took that deal to materialize, but J.J. McCullough seemingly acted quickly after going after Anthony Santander. But it's so much more complicated to get that trade to happen. There are names out there everybody likes, right? You may like Taylor Ward. I have brought up Taylor Ward multiple times. There's also a reason right now that Taylor Ward's name no longer comes up, because I think the Angels are pretty tough to negotiate with. And the Royals are in that spot where they want to upgrade the lineup, but they're also not willing to part ways with guys they consider to be huge pieces for the future. And if you go to the Angels right now and you say, we would like Taylor Ward, and they said, okay, it'll take Carter Jensen and Ben Kudrna, do you pull the trigger on that deal? I'm saying no to that. A 30-year-old outfielder, as much as I think Taylor Ward would fit and truly benefit the Royals in 2025, I do not think that it's one of those moves where you mortgage away two of your top 10 prospects. I think there are a few untouchables in the Royals system, and when they're negotiating with some of these teams, I think those names get brought up, and that's why you haven't seen the Royals act on a trade. It's not for a lack of trying. I can promise you that, right? I think the Royals are trying to upgrade this lineup, but the reason I came back to Randal Grichuk's name, or I bring up Mark Canha's name, or I brought up Adam Duvall's name, none of those three guys were going to transform or solve the middle of the order problem the Royals have. But it is a slight upgrade, and you could have a slight advantage. And when it's only $5 million over 1 year, I think that's a deal you would have been fine with, right? If they bring in Mark Canha on a deal just like that, it's not a game-changing move, but it's a slight upgrade because of the walk rate, because of the on-base numbers. That's why I like Mark Canha a little bit. Maybe not as the sole bat they bring in, but as a bench option, a platoon option. And so if you are at this point just convincing yourself a trade's going to happen, that's fine. I'm still holding out hope it happens. But there is a real-world possibility it just doesn't, that the Royals are not willing to go that extra mile to give away a prospect they're really high on to solve a problem that may just be this year. I mean, we have discussed this before, that maybe the best option is a stopgap bat, and then Jack Caglione could be that answer by the end of the year or early 2026. Or maybe you bring in a Mark Canha, or you bring in a Yoan Moncada, or you bring in an Adam Duvall, and you try to use the strength of your rotation and your bullpen, hope that the top of the lineup can carry your offense and the bottom portion doesn't have as bad of a year as it did last year, and you want to get to the deadline, right? You get to the trade deadline, and now you go negotiate for Taylor Ward because things can be different. Or there'll be another name that pops up because the trade deadline always has new names that are popping up. But I think that's kind of the frustrating part for a lot of fans out there, is when a trade's not happening, it comes across as they're not trying anymore. I don't think that's the case. I think the Royals are trying to be patient, wait out some of these teams that aren't budging, but also understand we're not going to mortgage away our farm system and guys that we feel like can be big league contributors in a year or two for a guy that might be a good fit in 2025, or maybe they don't live up to what we expect of him. You go out there and give an older outfield bat a 1-year deal, there's not a ton of risk there. If you bring in Mark Canha and he hits 240 for you with a 350 OBP, I think that would be all fine and well for what the Royals would likely give him. If you go give Yoan Moncada a 1-year, $8 to $10 million deal, and he hits 260 in the first half, Okay, I think you feel fine about it. Because again, you're not mortgaging a ton into that future. That's the only reason I've brought up some of these guys' names and why I think they'd be fits. I do believe some of those guys were fits. Clearly, the Royals did as well. But it's not that I'm saying those guys are the answer. I don't believe anybody in free agency is the true answer. When you're talking about a middle of the order bat, you are talking about the thumper, right? You are talking about a guy that can drive in 100, that can run into 30 bombs, right? Nobody really, even through trade, is available like that. And even if they are, they're asking for top prospects in the Royals system. And the Royals, along with building that big league ball club, they want to make sure they're still replenishing the farm system and they're starting to get back to that level where there's more than just one top 100 guy. There's more than just one guy who has tremendous upside. There's multiple. And to trade away one of those guys for 1 year, maybe 2 or a year and a half of a stopgap guy, you got to be pretty sure that the guy you're giving up is not going to flourish in a way that comes back to bite you in the ass. Or you got to be 100% confident the guy you're bringing in is the game changer for the lineup. And I think that's how the Royals are taking this, as if they're going to trade, they're not just trading for a bounce back type deal. You know, I think Brett Beatty was mentioned before. I think it was either by David Lesky or maybe it was one of the national writers as well. Like, Brett Beatty is a fine prospect bat. And he is going to be a starter for the New York Mets, one of the top teams in the National League this coming season. Brett Beatty's also never had a year with an OPS plus over 100, league average, right? So if you are trading for Brett Beatty, it's not a sure thing, right? You have to bank on the upside, and that's the danger. There's sometimes that upside never is reached. That ceiling never gets touched. That they just remain that average, right? So to me, I think that's why the trade market has been pretty quiet. I think the Royals would like to get something done, but if they need to pivot, then I think one of those bats is likely who they're going to pivot to. Because I remain pretty confident a bat will be added before spring training. It may not be the 100% solution, but I think even getting a slight advantage here and there, platooning with either Renfroe in right or Melendez in left, can give you a slight edge that you need, maybe until the deadline. Those are things that I think people have to start thinking about when the Royals are going to be going about adding another bat. There's really not a perfect solution out there. And if there was, it's going to cost a lot to get that perfect solution. So we'll see how it all plays out with J.J. Baclo and the Royals before the start of spring training. All right, for our final segment, we are going to talk about this bullpen. Now they've added a few arms. Who are going to be the odd men out? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor in Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on that first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And I actually just had my tickets delivered for the game in San Francisco this year. Actually, a few of the games in San Francisco, Royals and Giants, already got on my Apple Wallet. It was really easy to use. I strongly urge you to go and use Gametime. Use that app if you are thinking about buying tickets for some upcoming games this summer. All right, what we are going to end the show with is kind of circling back to what we opened the show with, which was talking about this bullpen, why it excites me, the new names in that bullpen, the hard throwers they now have. All of that can excite you. But it does bring up the question, who's going to be left out of the bullpen? And maybe more importantly, are any of those names going to be traded in spring training because there's no room for them? I mean, one of the guys that I think is projected on the opening day roster, Carlos Hernandez, is kind of stuck in the middle here because he's out of options. and he could make the team if he's healthy. I think he does make the team out of camp, but there's no guarantee that happens. There's no guarantee that he looks strong in spring training, and there's no guarantee that nobody else just rips that job from him. So he's one name to watch. Of if he's struggling, if he's not healthy, the Royals will either have to DFA him or they're going to have to trade him. So right now, I do think he's got a little bit of the upper hand to make the roster. Maybe that upsets you, maybe it doesn't. But that's kind of the deal you have when somebody's out of options. There's a couple other names too, bats-wise, that the Royals are going to need to make a tough decision on. Another name that I now believe is going to be an odd man out is James McArthur. And I go back to the middle of this offseason. I had a segment, might have been 2 segments actually, on James McArthur and how I thought in a lesser role with less pressure, he'd have that opportunity to kind of rediscover what he had in 2023 to close out the year, which eventually won him the closer's job in 2024. Not for an extended period of time, but James McArthur was seen as one of the better arms in that bullpen, at least early on in 2024. And then when you start blowing a lot of games, you're considered one of the worst arms in the bullpen, even if your stuff plays really well, which I think that James McArthur's stuff does play well. I think that curveball has tremendous drop to it. I think it has a tremendous spin rate on it. But there are just guys that are more established. They are more proven. And he's going to have to go out there and, like I said, rip a spot from somebody. Maybe he does rip a spot from Carlos Hernandez, but I think James McArthur has options. I think you can put him in Omaha to start the year, and if he pitches really well, which I'd expect him to, he could find his spot in Kansas City as early as, April, mid to late April. Who knows if guys get banged up, guys start to struggle, you need to make a move. That could always happen. But right now, I think somebody like James McArthur would be the odd man out. The second name that comes to mind is Kyle Wright. I've had more than a few questions this offseason about Kyle Wright, and if he goes into camp healthy, he can win the number 5 job. And I think you just need to pump the brakes a little bit as to how you evaluate Kyle Wright, because yes, he was a 20-game winner. He was excellent for Atlanta, and I think that was 2022, the year they went on to win the World Series. He was great. He even had his moments in 2021. But 2022 now feels like a decade ago, right? And as great as that year was, the numbers in every other year of his big league career are not very good. And now that he's coming off of a very significant shoulder injury, it just is going to take a little bit of time, I think, to get back into the swing of things. And I think the Royals understand that and still see him as a very valuable member of this team and could be making starts at some point and could be pitching out of the bullpen in high leverage spots. But I think with the additions of some of the guys they've brought in, it leaves somebody like Kyle Wright a little bit on the outs, where let's build him up a little bit in Omaha, and then we can go from there. Because in spring training, I don't see him competing really with Bubic and Marsh. I think the number 5 spot comes down to Bubic and Marsh, and Kyle Wright, they can slow play it a little bit. I would love to see him healthy from day one, but even if he is healthy and he looks pretty good, I don't think there's a need to rush it, even with all the time he's had off. I think you just want to make sure everything's all good. Either you can stretch him out in Omaha or you can try him out in the bullpen. But right now, with the names that are already out there, I don't see how he fits breaking camp with the team. I don't know if I could see him in that long reliever role, and I don't know if I could see him in a one-inning role right now. Mainly because Daniel Lynch, I think, has the long relief role. And the loser of the Bubic and Alec Marsh number 5 spot battle does kind of have a question mark. Maybe not so much Bubic, because if Bubic doesn't pitch well in spring training for the starter's role, we know he can be an excellent back-end bullpen arm. Alec Marsh is a little bit different. Like, if he loses out to Chris Bubic, which in my projections he does, I don't know where he fits in the bullpen, because Daniel Lynch has the long relief role. You talk about the 2 other lefties, Sam Long and Angel Serpa. They're one-inning guys. Serpa can maybe stretch it out the 2 innings. You have Schreiber, who's a one-inning guy. Hernandez is a one-inning guy. Then you got Harvey, and you have Estevez, and you have Lucas Erceg. I don't know where the fit would be. I can't recall if that does leave one more door open or if it would mean that he'd have to take Carlos Hernandez's spot. But right now, I think those three guys are a little bit on the outskirts when you're talking about bullpen arms and who's going to be in, who's going to be out. But that's also the fascinating part about spring training. Some of these position battles are going to have to be taken. They're going to have to be won. They're going to have to be ripped from somebody, even if that means DFAing somebody as a result. Some of these guys that are out of options, they have a lot to prove going into camp, and we'll be very excited to cover that as early as next weekend. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be back on Friday for another edition of a Mailbag Friday. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.